U.S. warplanes are currently striking targets inside Iran. In Washington, some voices are already demanding regime change. On paper, America possesses overwhelming firepower. Its defense budget exceeds $850 billion. What Washington may not have, however, is a cheap way out. A quick, decisive victory may be highly unlikely. This war is not just about missiles or air superiority. It is fundamentally about oil, debt, and inflation. Analysts at CSIS warn a full-scale war could cost over $1 trillion. But the immediate threat to Americans is not just the national debt. It is higher energy costs and tighter financial conditions. If oil prices spike, transportation and grocery costs usually follow. Renewed inflation pressure could force the Federal Reserve to keep borrowing costs elevated. That directly hits your mortgages, auto loans, and credit cards. Iran does not need to defeat the US military conventionally. It may only need to make every American step painfully expensive. This strategy creates three distinct challenges. First, we must analyze the battlefield costs of Iran's tactics. Second, we look at the systemic economic fallout for American consumers. Third, we examine the political roadblocks preventing a peaceful resolution. Neither Washington nor Tehran can easily back down without looking weak. So the real question is no longer just whether Washington can win. It is whether the US economy can afford what victory actually costs. And in this video, we explain the hidden financial reality of this conflict. To truly understand this crisis, we must rewind to 2018. That year, Washington abruptly withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal. The US launched a devastating maximum pressure campaign. The goal was to financially suffocate Tehran and force political concessions. But the strategy produced an entirely different outcome. Iran abandoned diplomacy and embraced a doctrine of maximum resistance. Instead of surrendering, Tehran spent the next 8 years preparing for prolonged isolation. During this period, Iran's internal power structure shifted dramatically. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps gained unprecedented military and economic control. The IRGC knew they could not defeat American stealth fighters in traditional combat. Therefore, they completely restructured their military doctrine. They built a decentralized mosaic defense system across the Zagros mountains. This network relies on thousands of cheap mobile drones and hidden missile launchers. The objective is not to win the airspace. It is to make every American airstrike exponentially more expensive. Simultaneously, Tehran built a financial shield to survive Western sanctions. Reuters extensively documented the rise of Iran's massive ghost fleet. Hundreds of dark oil tankers regularly turn off their tracking transponders. They secretly move millions of barrels of sanctioned oil to Asian markets. The Wall Street Journal reports much of this trade bypasses the US financial system. This covert network provides Tehran with a vital, continuous revenue stream. It blunts the impact of American economic weapons. So why is this simmering standoff exploding right now? Recent intelligence indicates power inside Tehran has hardened significantly. Reuters notes that Mojtaba Khamenei has secured the supreme leadership. He is widely perceived as closely aligned with the hardline security establishment. In response to rising threats, US forces launched the Epic Fury airstrikes. American bombers are currently targeting Iranian proxy networks and missile sites. But destroying launch pads does not erase Iran's asymmetric cost curve. This is exactly where the distant conflict reaches American households. The Financial Times warns that wider Middle East instability creates immediate inflationary shocks. When geopolitical risks rise, global energy markets panic and oil prices spike. Higher fuel costs instantly drive up domestic trucking, shipping, and grocery prices. If inflation suddenly rebounds, the Federal Reserve is effectively trapped. They cannot cut interest rates to stimulate the US economy. Consequently, American mortgages, auto loans, and credit card debt remain painfully expensive. Let's examine the political motives driving this escalation. According to the New York Times, hardliners now firmly control Tehran. Reportedly led by Mojtaba Khamenei, they refuse compromise with the West. Khamenei desperately needs to consolidate his domestic power. Projecting strength against America is his primary tool. However, Iran's behavior is also driven by survival logic. Look at a geopolitical map. US military bases and allied forces surround Iran. Experts at the Brookings Institution highlight this strategic reality. Tehran views Western economic sanctions as active warfare. Building cheap drones and missiles is not an irrational act. It is a calculated strategy for regime survival. Iran knows it cannot win a conventional war, so military strategists describe their approach as a porcupine strategy. America is the lion, Iran is the porcupine. The rugged Zagros mountains form the porcupine's body. Thousands of hidden missiles are its deadly quills. A lion can kill a porcupine, but the lion may bleed to death from the financial wounds. Iran only needs to make an invasion unacceptably costly. This brings us to the brutal economic math. The Pentagon is fighting a deeply asymmetrical financial war. Consider this reality from defense analysts. The US frequently uses $2 million interceptors for defense. They target $20,000 Iranian suicide drones. This equation rapidly drains the US defense budget, but the real threat targets your wallet directly. Iran's covert ghost fleet smuggles billions in oil to Asia. The Wall Street Journal reports many transactions bypass the US dollar. This sanctions-busting trade erodes Washington's leverage at the margins, but the immediate danger to Americans is simpler. War risk drives global oil and diesel prices sharply higher. When fuel rises, transport and shipping costs usually follow. This creates a domino effect on your grocery bills. Bloomberg warns this could trigger renewed inflationary shocks. If inflation stays elevated, the Federal Reserve has less room to maneuver. They cannot cut interest rates quickly. Consequently, your mortgages, auto loans, and credit cards stay painfully expensive. Iran may not defeat America militarily, but it can raise the price of every American move. Finally, we must examine the roadblocks preventing peace. Why are both sides stuck in this dangerous escalation? The answer lies heavily in domestic politics. Neither Washington nor Tehran can easily back down. In Washington, politicians face intense electoral pressure. The Associated Press notes that looking weak is political suicide. Many voices are demanding a decisive, quick victory. However, experts at CSIS call this the illusion of decisive force. Recent Middle East history makes a quick victory highly doubtful. Meanwhile, Mojtaba Khamenei faces his own domestic pressure. He reportedly lacks the absolute religious authority of his predecessors. He must constantly prove his resolve to the IRGC generals. If Khamenei surrenders to US pressure, he risks looking weak to his military. A weak leader in Tehran invites internal instability. Therefore, both sides are locked in a deadly staring contest. It is a high-stakes test of economic and political endurance. Both leaders may be betting that the other side will blink first. So where does this crisis go next? We see three broad paths for the coming months. Each path carries a serious cost for the United States. The first path is the gray zone. This means a long, grinding military stalemate. Neither side launches a full ground invasion. However, deadly drone strikes and sabotage continue indefinitely. Analysts at Reuters suggest this is the most likely outcome. Both leaders desperately want to avoid total collapse. But what does this mean for your wallet? A grinding conflict keeps energy markets tense. This sustains a prolonged period of sticky inflation. High grocery and gas prices could become the new normal. The Wall Street Journal notes this slow economic bleed. The Federal Reserve may keep borrowing costs painfully high. The second path is the quagmire. This is the worst-case military scenario for Washington. Some voices demand a full ground invasion. They want to repeat the 2003 Iraq War. However, the Washington Post warns this comparison is fatal. Iran is absolutely nothing like Iraq. Geographically, Iran is 4 times larger than Iraq. Its population is more than double the size. Crucially, Iraq was mostly a flat, open desert. Iran is a massive, mountainous natural fortress. Experts at CSIS estimate an invasion could cost trillions. A multi-trillion-dollar war would severely damage American purchasing power. Market confidence could plunge rapidly. This path drastically raises the risk of a domestic recession. The third path is the bitter pill. This is the least damaging path for the global economy. Washington and Tehran secretly negotiate a back-channel deal. Axios reports intermediaries like Oman could broker this peace. The US would limit its airstrikes. In return, Iran would halt proxy attacks and shipping disruptions. Global financial markets would likely calm down. Energy prices and domestic inflation pressures might rapidly cool. The Economist suggests this is the most rational choice. However, this economic peace requires massive political sacrifice. Washington must swallow a bitter diplomatic pill. It means accepting clear limits to American leverage. The US would officially recognize a multipolar Middle East. Unchallenged American dominance in the region would effectively end. So what is the bottom line of this entire crisis? This conflict exposes a harsh reality about modern warfare. Washington possesses the most expensive military machine on Earth. However, overwhelming force alone may not guarantee a lasting outcome. Iran has fundamentally shifted the battleground. They prove you do not need stealth jets to bleed a superpower. Economic endurance matters just as much as military firepower. Ultimately, American consumers bear the hidden costs of this standoff. Sustained Middle East tension can keep global energy prices high. That keeps pressure on your family's daily grocery budget. Distant airstrikes eventually reach your kitchen table through inflation. This leaves the United States with a historic, painful choice. Washington can escalate further and risk deeper financial strain, or American leaders can accept clear limits to their regional influence. There are absolutely no easy answers here. There are only incredibly expensive trade-offs. We want to hear your thoughts on this unprecedented crisis. If the real cost of this war shows up at home first, what happens? How much economic pain will Americans accept before military strategy changes? Let us know your honest opinion in the comments below. If you found this deep dive helpful, please hit like. Subscribe to Direct Breaking News for more objective geopolitical analysis. Thank you for watching, and we will see you soon.